making a beautiful life. I'm changing, rearranging. I see a beautiful day. It's coming my way. It's a beautiful day. I'm living a beautiful life. I'm making a beautiful life. I'm changing, rearranging. I see a beautiful day. It's coming my way. It's a beautiful day.
Hello, my name is Jaquita Lee, and you are viewing A Beautiful Life. And as promised, we are going into phase 2 of our transition, the 4 Ds of transition. And I am joined with Pastor Tavares Robinson, who has so graciously accepted the assignment of sharing with us how to transition God's way and how to learn to not only go through transition but grow through it. So Pastor, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You ready for part 2?
We're ready.
So we ended with disengagement. I want you to just go briefly into disengagement, and we're going to bring them right into section part 2, which is disidentification. Disengagement
is the first process that everyone would encounter when God is transitioning in. Keep in mind, change opens the door to transition. Change is usually suddenly. Transition is usually a process. Change usually happens when you begin to outgrow a place that you're familiar with. That opens the door for God to begin to transition you. That first stage or process of transition is disengagement. He causes you to lose, or there's a disattachment away from whatever you've been familiar with, the culture, whatever you've been accustomed to, friendships, relationships. There's usually a removal of that, and then now God has you on course for the next step.
And so now we go into a disidentification.
Correct. Disidentification is I start to lose the identity of what my former lifestyle created. This was the struggle for a lot of people, especially like in leadership. If I'm in leadership at one place and God is transitioning me, this next place, man, I know who I am. And so all the responsibilities and the duties that I had, people might not know who I am now. And so I'm fighting with this identification period because my former place gave me an identity. That's why some people will stay in something bad, even a bad relationship, if the relationship has given them a certain identity.
Wow.
And so if they ever lose that relationship, then the identity that was created in a relationship is also lost. Then who am I?
Let's park right there, because how many stay at churches for 15, 20, 25 years because they are the head usher, you know, or the head deaconess, or, you know, the armor bearer of the pastor, or whatever, but knowing that God has said that their time is up. But because they hold that position, they're holding on to that identification that they've been given, where everybody knows their name.
Correct.
But if we are saying that, God, I'm submitting, I'm yielding, and you take me from a place of everybody knows my name to obscurity, why is that so challenging for us if we believe that God has better and greater for us?
I think we believe it verbally, but I don't think we believe it in our hearts. Because keep in mind, this identification actually means God's going to remove a label that has been placed upon me that might not necessarily be his label for me.
Wow.
And so I have to come to the conclusion that I've been walking in something that's not really ordained by God for me. And so I think that's the struggle, to know that, man, who am I then? What I've been doing for all these years, who am I? And people struggle with that, because identity and being identified, especially in this culture that we're living in an age that people love self, image is a lot. Image is very important to people. People will do anything to hold on to an image. People will go broke holding on to an image. this image thing is really killing people in the church. But God will basically move you to a place and say, hey, that's not who I called you to be. That's not the label that man has placed upon you. That's not who I called you to be. And so we struggle and, but God, who am I? Who am I? Who have I been all this long? And we struggle with that internally because if that's not who I am, then who am I?
You know, as you were talking, so many examples came to mind. I think it's so important that we are mindful of labels that people put on us. And that we answer to. You know, some of these labels may be, you know, oh, you're such a sweet person. You should probably work with the children.
Right.
You know, not always having the clearance from God of saying, this is the label that I'm giving you. But understanding your sweetness might be for you to clean the toilets. Would we be okay with that label? You know? And so I think about not only the pressures that we put on ourselves to be the doctor or to be the attorney, or you know, I think about how young labels are placed on us. You know, this is going to be my little doctor. This is going to be, you know, our little attorney. And then we go throughout life and it's like we're always vying for that next label. And God forbid you don't call a certain pastor, or you don't call her prophetess, you know, whomever. When you remove and disengage and that disidentification comes into play, I see it as God peeling away everything that you're connecting yourself so that you can stand naked before Him, that He can begin to have a label on us that is really more centered to people seeing Him than it is us.
And that's essential. God cannot name us until He removes man's labels on us. And so that's important. I take from my own personal life. Playing college basketball, you know, playing basketball my whole life and going overseas before I got saved to South Africa. And I remember laying in a bed thinking I'm saved now. And I remember saying to myself, okay, God, I'm going to tell all these young people who you are. I remember I had this whole plan in my head. I'm telling young people who you are. Matter of fact, God, I'm going to write scriptures on my basketball shoes. I'm just going to show everybody who you are. And I remember laying in my spiritual mom's bed, and I remember hearing God and saying, basketball is over. Keep in mind, that's all I knew. That was my God. Growing up in inner city, that's how you get out the inner city. That was my God. And crushed because I'm thinking I'm saved now, He's going to give me my desire to continue. And to hear God say, that's not who you are anymore. Basketball is over. I'm in a place, then who am I? Internally, I'm grieving because I'm thinking, okay, how can I function? How can I live? That's all I know. But then in that same breath, I realize, okay, if this is not who I am, then who you call me to be? So removing that label allowed God to identify who I was. And for that moment, when God revealed to me who He called me to be, I realized it never was man's approval. I'd have to earn man's favor. I felt free. I can't explain it. It's something of a freedom when God says, this is who you are. And it removes every label. It removes every desire you try to earn people's approval of you. When God identifies you. And it's important, but you have to go through that stage of God confronting our identity.
When you were talking, Pastor, I thought about people who would say, you know, but isn't it about the gift that I have? You know, isn't it the thing that my gift shows me, or gives me an idea of what it is that God is going to have me to do? And so now, you know, you're playing basketball so well, and all of a sudden He says, you know, basketball is not what you're going to do anymore. How do I transition when I thought this was all that I knew?
It goes to a heart of submission. And you don't know if you're submitted until God reveals to you something that's contrary to your desire.
Replay.
You don't know if you're submitted until God reveals something that's contrary to your desire. All of us can say how much we'll do anything for God.
Come on.
Like the song you're saying, for your glory, I would do anything. We can all say that until God speaks something contrary to our expectation.
My God.
And so you never know how submitted you are until God tells you that your expectation is not His. Because that requires adjustments in our lives. And I don't know if people is really that totally devoted to God. And you'll find out at that moment. And so a lot of things we do because we hear it, but you don't know it until that moment. I say this, spiritual maturity is always measured when I can obey God when His instructions is contrary to my expectation. And that opens you the door. But there's a freedom, even though it's painful, there's a freedom. Scripture says, Christ died and our life is hidden in Him. Which means I can never know who I truly am until I get in Him.
Come on.
It's in Him.
Come on.
And so everything that people may have labeled you and placed upon you, there's a freedom when God tells you, this is who I made you to be. And you have to get to the point where man's gift does not mean God's calling. One size does not fit all. God may take someone who in basketball and say, hey, my purpose for you is continue to stay in basketball. But one size does not fit all.
Right.
So that's the danger of us using one testimony and branding it for the whole body of Christ. One size does not fit all. And I think we use the scripture, you know, God has no respect of person. What He done for one, He done for others. That scripture doesn't really mean that. It means salvation. God has no respect of person. It refers into salvation. But if God calls this one person to excel in that gift that they had naturally, doesn't mean necessarily, and they can give a testimony, they can be lovely, but that doesn't mean that God's going to use the same thing with me. And I have to learn that. And I wouldn't trade what God called me to do for anything in this world. I don't even, basketball is a long in memory. I play it still, but I love doing what I'm doing because this is what God called me to do.
Because a part of that transition, if I'm going from disidentification to where He's removing what I thought I was connected to identity-wise, and then now He's showing me, it's like Him being a very present help, Him being so in love and concerned with us that I love you so much, I'm sitting down with you to show you the plan that I have for your life. And so I think a part of the enemy's plan is for us to kick against the grain, to do our vision boards, you know. And I had my issues sometimes with our vision boards, because a vision board has to be more than just cutting out pictures of the things that I desire or I want. Because if I have been bought with a price, that means that I'm no longer my own. And I know that a lot of this comes with maturity. It's not just sometimes an overnight thing. It really is a process. But if we really get to the fundamental aspects of it, many things that I have wanted, I had to do a self-check and check my motives sometimes. You know, I remember being in graduate school preparing for my doctorate, and it really was, I was prepared to pay all this money to hear somebody say Dr. Lee. But it wasn't really that he said, this is my plan for you, as it was so much of my hidden agenda as to why I wanted it. So Pastor, talk a little bit about the divorcing of these ideals that we have, of the identities that we want, because I know that this show is going to be challenging for people. You know, we live in a culture that you're defined so much by the letters behind your name and the oh God, my spirit is weak, and the associations that you're connected with. That to hear someone say, God may strip all of that from you. The very thing that you're good at. The very thing that you can do with your eyes closed. And give you the blueprint for the identity that He wants for you. Talk a little bit about the challenges for us when it comes to that.
And I think you said it. It's the culture that we're in. To be able to divorce, that term, a strong term. because this is what we know, and I think we have our own desire what we want to do, and sometimes we co-sign God's name on it, and we've been told whatever you're good at, that may be your gifting, but if you're good in it, how can God be glorified? God uses the weakness of man to get the glory out of man. I take an illustration. I take the Apostle Paul, who was groomed from birth to be a Pharisee. He said, my father was a Pharisee. He's the son of the Pharisees. He was taught by the top teacher, Gamaliel. Paul has this resume that's very impressive. Philippians chapter 3 tells us his resume. He's impressive resume. His lineage. He is groomed to be a Pharisee. That's all he knows. Galatians chapter 1 tells us that Paul said he is seated among all his contemporaries, which means all his associations know that this man is groomed to be the next great Pharisee. He has one encounter with Christ, and he realized what he'd been groomed from birth from is not the identity that God gave him. Painful. And to think that he thought being a Pharisee was part of God's will for him. And he has one encounter and realizes, I'm not called to be a Pharisee. And God snatches that label off of him, takes him to Arabia for 3 years to deprogram him. And not knowing that he's an apostle from birth, but man labeled him as a Pharisee. Oh my God. And that's what Satan does. Satan knows if I cannot stop the call of God upon your life, I will allow man to touch you to hinder the call of God on your life.
My God.
And man touched Paul's life until he had an encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus, and God redeemed him. And so it's the liberation, but you have to go through that. What you're good at might not necessarily be what the calling of God is. And I say this again, you have to have someone there to walk you through that process of surgery, because you have to lay on that table and allow God to cut some things out of you. And you have to not only have the surgeon Christ there, but you need people around you who Christ has entrusted to cut you too, to let you know, okay, you hurt right now, but you're gonna be healed.
Amen. To
walk you through that dangerous thing, because people hold on to the image.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's paramount in order to make that transition.
You know, Pastor, the analogy that you use in reference to being placed on that table, you know, and the great physician doing what he does so well, and having people there who will also be a part of that process. You know, we're living in a time where people thrive on having yes people around them, and people who are going to agree with, you know, what their plans and what their desires are. But this hour is going to call for us to have people like how Nathan was for David, you know, who will say what thus says the Lord. And I think about even the position that Nathan had in David's life. I mean, he had to be so connected with God, because he wasn't even on the same position as David. But when he came to release that word to David, David had to acknowledge the God that was in him to bring that word. And so talk a little bit about, as we transition with this identification, how important your circle is as you go through this deprogramming, and as you go through God stripping you of these labels, because some of those labels are people who are in your circle. And so therefore it is a stripping away of even sometimes our connections with them.
And that was going to be my point. And sometimes God may strip me away from that circle. Let's take Job again. Job had an inner circle of friends. And when Job began to go through the variety of events,
come on now,
Job's friends start placing these labels upon him. I thought you were righteous. I thought you was righteous. And Job actually had to turn around and look at his friend and says, what miserable comforts are you all? The worst thing you can do is, when God has you go through transition, is listening to people who's only seeing you from a soulish point of view. And that's the danger of having yes people around you, because they might be saying things that encourage your flesh, but not be speaking on behalf of God. and they can cause you to miss the transition point. So it's dangerous, but keep in mind, Satan has to use people around me. So my inner circle or my circle of people, they're going to be paramount in transition because either God removes them, or either God has them to speak a true word to me, or they're going to be hindrances to me, because they're going to be saying things that not necessarily be out of the mouth of God to keep me. For example, God stripped me of my identity, and they may say, oh, it's really Satan. Keep pressing in. You know, it's really Satan trying to stop you, Satan trying to block you, and it's really God.
My God.
And it's really God.
My God.
And I say this all the time to people in church. Satan don't want us to transition, because transition actually means once we're ended, that God now approves us to walk in our purpose, which means trouble for him. So why would he want us to transition? Yeah. So he has to start to use circumstances and the people around us. Satan killed everybody in Job's life except his wife. And the objective is, if you won't hear through nobody else, you're going to hear your wife. And what she say to Job? Curse God. Curse God. Why you keep holding on to your integrity, your image? Curse God and die. And Job's looking at and said, you speak as a foolish woman. So you have to recognize and discern when my inner circle is not hearing from God. And that requires humility on my end. And so you really have to make sure that I have people around me that's in a transition, that's really hearing from God, and it's not people that don't want me to transition because they'll show their deficiency.
Okay, this is good to me. We're gonna go to our beautiful business spotlight, but when we come back, I want you to go right back into that topic and talk about the circle, because it's so vitally important that we have a circle truly who hears from God, especially when God has you doing great exploits, as he has a plan for everybody. It is so vitally important for people to know what God is saying in this hour. So when we come back, you're going to get a chance to hear more from Pastor Tavares Robinson as he talks about stage disidentification of transition.
For the passing of a loved one, honor them with the best quality service by choosing Angelic Monument. Since 2010, they have provided quality custom memorials and superior customer service at a fair and competitive price with integrity. Their services include headstone cleaning and restoration, funeral pre-planning, same-day on-site design and approval, unveiling services, grief counseling and seminars, and payment plans are available. Visit their website at angelicmonument.com or call 954-486-5150 to speak to one of their customer service representatives. Angelic Monument, the home of a superior attention to detail, professional service, and a beautiful staff eager to serve you.
Take me to the King.
SOS Unlimited is dedicated to bringing the best in sound to your next event. Many have experienced the musical stylings of SOS Unlimited. When you're in need of the ultimate in DJ and sound services, call SOS today. From yacht parties to annual community events, from concerts to custom CDs, SOS Unlimited is the choice for the ultimate party experience. Call today.
Hey DJ, keep playing that song all night, on and on and on.
B&S Delicious Desserts. What you're about to see has been created by these blessed hands. What's your most creative idea that you can think of for your next dessert? B&S is taking the limits off of culinary treats, and to think greater is coming from B&S Delicious Desserts. This news is hot and fresh out the oven. B&S Delicious Desserts is now shipping all over the U.S., so make sure you call today to get your order for your next event.
Greater is coming. Wanna let you know, greater is coming. Yeah, greater, yes it is. Said I know that my greater
Pastor, we ended off with you talking about the circle and how sometimes our circle can, with good intentions, encourage us to go forward and don't give up. And sometimes we're continuing to go down a road where it just seems like nothing is working.
Right.
No matter how much money we put into it, no matter how many hours that we put into it, it just seems like it's not blessed. And I think a harsh reality is why sometimes we stay in things longer is because of the time that we put in. And what are people going to say? And I thought I heard God. But the loving, unconditional love, the love that God has for us, He's never sitting there saying, like, I told you so, and belittling us.
Correct.
His love for us is saying, baby, I want you to get this right.
Correct.
Because if you get this transitional moment right, what I have for you is going to exceed what you thought it was going to be. And I'm not even just talking about from a material place.
Correct.
But the transition that happens in our hearts.
Correct.
When God takes us to another dimension in Him, understanding who He is.
Correct.
So go back to that part, because I think that's so vitally important, Pastor. We're just living in a time where, we have circles and we have people who are always speaking in our lives. But if that person is not saved, or if that person is so governed by their own desires and interests, how can that affect our walk and what we're doing?
I think, David says it. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly. The word ungodly actually means one who has twisted views. One who's twisted. They may say some things before that were right, but they don't mean everything they say is right. And so sometimes we go back off their past being right and we take up everything else. But you have to discern my circle. You have to discern who God places around you and the motive of them. And a lot of times I look at Lot. Lot knew what he was in was bad, but he didn't want to leave. His circle was bad. And one reason I believe it was hard for Lot to leave, because he chose the place. He chose the place. And so it's hard to leave something when you realize that you chose it. This is what you picked. This is what you said was God. And so it's hard for you to come out even though things are deteriorating around it. So we rather fast, have somebody touch and agree with us, for God to change it, versus us leaving.
Say I missed it.
I missed it. It takes humility through transition. It takes humility. There's nothing wrong with saying, I miss you, God. I missed you. Now that's when our image is on the line, because we told everybody else how it was God. But that's what transition is designed to produce, that humility in us. Joseph walked through this humility. And when it was all said and done, he stood in a place of humility and understood which I meant for evil, God meant for my good, because he was humbled. He was humbled. And so humility is a requirement. But your circle, they can either bless you, or Satan can use them to be your greatest hindrance.
So earlier, Pastor, you talked about how through this transition, God will allow us to see our heart, to see where we are, see where our maturity level is. Talk a little bit about that, because I think we don't oftentimes see trials and tribulations from that perspective of understanding this really can show me how much I love God and where I am in God. When transition hits, when he's saying no, when he's closing doors, not Satan, not the enemy, but God himself.
Right. And Peter is a great illustration of an individual who left all to follow Christ. And in that, Peter was part of the Christ quote-unquote inner circle. Peter, James, and John. These three individuals allowed to go transfiguration. They was considered the inner circle of Christ, so to speak. In that, Peter had a certain view of himself that was not really God's point of view of him. He thought he was ready, to the point that when Jesus said, "You're going to deny me," Peter, just refused. He refused it. No, I'm not. I'm prepared to die with you. And Jesus said, "The rooster will call 3 times, you're going to deny me." Peter never believed it because his zeal and his point of view had created an identity that he was ready. But God knew he was not ready. God knew that he was not ready, especially for the assignment that God had for Peter. Peter didn't know the ultimate purpose for his life. God did. So Jesus says, okay, Peter, Satan desired to sift you as wheat, and I'm giving him permission. And Peter fails. He denies him 3 times. Peter now goes back and see Jesus is he's resurrected. He's cooking fish. Jesus goes to Peter. Peter sees him and says, do you love me? 3 times he asks him. 3 times because Peter denies him 3 times. But the challenge of this conversation, that God is allowing Peter to see in his heart that his ambition was not really there for God. He had good intentions, but what was needed wasn't mature yet. He was not prepared to die for Christ. And that was going to be needed for his life, because ultimately Peter dies for Christ.
Yes, come on now.
But if he never has that experience of failing and God revealing his heart, Peter never been placed in a place of maturity, so ultimately he fulfills his purpose. So God allows him to taste failure so he does not experience failure. And this is the thing that God does in our life. He will allow us to see that my love for God is not what I thought. I don't love him as strongly as I thought. And the only way I found that out is when he did something contrary to my expectation. Then it takes an inward dying of me to realize, Lord, I owe you much more.
My God.
To know that you've forgiven me when I denied you, when I thought I loved you. To the point that Peter now was willing to die for him. Not before. What Peter didn't recognize, that 50 days later, he was going to stand up and be used on the day of Pentecost. 50 days earlier, he wasn't ready. So God took him through a quick process to show his heart condition, to prepare him for his purpose.
To God be the glory. I tell you, because that is the image of really who God is. Mm-hmm. And it's not always widely talked about. You know, that he would literally put me through a trial or allow something to happen for me to see my level of love for him, so that I could in turn do that soul search and that heart check.
Correct.
So that when that comes around, when that devil comes around the next time, that I'm going to be truly ready. Because if you even look at the lives of the apostles and how many of them were martyred and died, and how they were killed and murdered.
Correct.
I don't know if we would really have that desire to be that role today. You know, because when you look at what they stood for, think about the relationship that they had with Christ. Think about the experiences and the encounter that they had with him. For God I live and for God I die. And they meant it.
Correct.
And their lives were a testament to it.
Correct.
And so, Pastor, as we close out our second session with disidentification, and we closed out the first show with our life work or our homework, something that you can practically do as you go through the week with this particular word. Close out with our viewers on some practical things that they can do to really take ownership of a disidentification, and to really understand that it is preparing them for that next stage, which goes into disenchantment.
I think what a lot of us need to do is ask God, really get in that place of prayer and say, God, is this image or this identity that's been created that I walk in, is this really your will for me? It starts with prayer. Really praying and asking God with humility, God, is this really what you call me? Is this my label? Is this my purpose? Is this really my assignment? I know I may be gifted. I know I may, this may be a job, a skill that I have in my workplace, but is this really the purpose that you have for me? And then have a heart to be willing to listen. If it's contrary to your expectation, don't immediately say Satan.
Amen.
And I leave you with this thought, because this identification is painful, but I leave you with this thought, that God would never take you into the promised land wounded, but he will take you in the promised land broken.
Break that down.
Because once I realized that my identity is not what God created for me, it's going to break me. It's going to break me because now I have to find who I really am. And that's going to bring a breaking where the enemy in our lives say that's a wounded place. God's not really wounding you. That's our image being wounded. He's breaking us.
My God.
He's breaking us. And so don't confuse wounded with being broken.
A place of humility.
It's a humility. God wants us humble to recognize that God has ultimately put me in a position that I know spiritually I don't qualify for, naturally I don't have the strength for. I can't do this on my own. Because if I can't do it on my own, then ultimately when I'm doing it, God is getting the glory.
Come on.
And so God want to put you in a position that you're naturally in something that you're naturally good at, that you're naturally skilled in, that you naturally don't know anybody who can connect you to, because when it's all said and done, God's going to get the glory out of whatever position he brings you into.
I'm just going to end this particular show with "To God be all the glory." And so until Pastor Robinson sits on this purple love seat again for our next stage with the 4 Ds of transition, we pray that you will continue to let God be the leading, guiding force in your life, because it's truly about him steering us to living a beautiful life. Until we talk again, God bless.
I'm living a beautiful life. I'm making a beautiful life. I'm changing, rearranging. I see a beautiful day.